Okay, well, welcome to week 6 of the Alfred option. And this is a little bit of a continuation of what we covered last week. So as a reminder, we spoke at length about elites and excellence. And so, how do we recognize those 10 talent people, how they rise to the top, and how do we support those folks and make sure that the kinds of elites that we want them based on biblical principles, how do we put them in place, things like that. And so as a kind of continuation of that, we're going to be talking specifically about leadership and team dynamics. And so this is very much a practical lesson about leadership stuff. Being from the business world, I've taken a lot of different classes about leadership and things like that, and so I'm going to leverage a little bit of that, but a lot of it's going to be more like a practical wisdom talk today. So again, just to kind of remind you, hierarchy is inevitable. In order for us to develop our leaders well, we need to look at just how teams develop and how leaders lead well. So in order to set the context for this week, I think we should go first to the Word and read a short story from the life of Moses. So I'm going to read a story out of Exodus 18. So just kind of as a brief context for that, in this part of the book, this is the Exodus narrative, of course, and so the people have been brought out of Egypt. God has saved them mightily, and so Moses is now leading the people. And things are finally starting to get at scale to be a little bit unmanageable. And so this story here, Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, gives him some wise counsel here. So I'm going to read this. This is again the Exodus 18. I'm going to read verses 13 through 26. And so it was on the next day that Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood before Moses from morning until evening. So when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he did for the people, he said, "What is this thing that you are doing for the people? Why do you alone sit, and all the people stand before you from morning until evening?" And Moses said to his father-in-law, "Because the people come to me and to inquire of God. When they have a difficulty, they come to me, and I judge between one and another, and I make known the statutes of God and his laws." So Moses' father-in-law said to him, "The thing that you do is not good. Both you and these people who are with you will surely wear yourselves out, for this thing is too much for you, and you are not able to perform it by yourself. Listen now to my voice. I will give you counsel, and God will be with you. Stand before God for the people, so that you may bring difficulties to God. And you shall teach them the statutes and the laws, and show them the way they must walk, and the work they must do. Moreover, you shall select from all the people able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place such over them to be rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50s, and rulers of 10s. And let them judge the people at all times. Then it will be that every great matter they shall bring to you, but every small matter they themselves shall judge. So it will be easier for you, for they will bear the burden with you. If you do this thing, and God so commands you, then you will be able to endure, and all the people will go into their place in peace." So Moses heeded the voice of his father-in-law and did all that he had said. Moses chose able men of all Israel and made them heads over the people, rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50s, and rulers of 10s. So they judged the people at all times, and the hard cases they brought to Moses, but they judged every small case for themselves. So from that story, I'd like to introduce something called the Jethro principle. So as we just read, Moses had a line out of his door from dawn until dusk, trying to individually judge every single case and counsel every person in the nation. Jethro looked at this and told them plainly, "What you're doing is not good." This is actually, if you think about it, an inversion to the creation narrative. So when God was creating things and creating hierarchy amongst the chaos, it was good, right? And so what does Jethro say? It's not good. That everything's kind of flatlined and, everything's flattened. There's no hierarchy there. So by failing to establish a hierarchy, Moses was functionally flattening the world and ignoring the fact that he was a limited creature who could not be everywhere at once. So to solve this problem, Jethro instructed Moses to identify and appoint men of character to serve as a tiered hierarchy. This is the heart of the principle. Moses raised up leaders over tens, fifties, hundreds, and thousands. The system ensures that the burden of governance is distributed according to the complexity of the problems and the scale of the group being led. And if you look at the different numbers that he was using, I'm going to kind of put them into. Thanks for getting. Dehumidifier just came on, so turn that off. So we'll. Anyway, I'll speak a little bit louder just until that thing shuts off. Yeah, I will. All right. So there's two different kinds of categories that, I think two main things you kind of put them in. Leaders of tens. So that's kind of like the most basic level of leadership, similar to like a father ruling over his household or a leader of a small clan. These leaders work one-on-one with people, know everyone's opinions, and are physically present in their daily lives. And then you have the leaders over hundreds and thousands. And so as the numbers grow, these leaders must actually lead differently. They cannot interact with 1,000 people in the same way that fathers interacts with 10. Instead, they must lead through mediators, teams, and other leaders. And so I think that if you kind of, live long enough, you see that some people are more gifted to that than others, right? And so, you might be that kind of person that can lead over hundreds and thousands, or you might be someone who leads the 10. But either way, I think everybody in this room has some level of leadership that they need to exercise. And so, having that self-awareness or, having those around you that can recognize those things in you would be a good endeavor to pursue. In addition to that, I think one of the most important takeaways for us as a church is that Moses didn't just create these leaders out of thin air. Jethro's insight was that God had already salted the world and community with men who had these natural giftings and leadership capacities. The job of the top leaders is to look over the other people, identify those whom God has already gifted to rule, test their character, and then establish them in their proper place. So in a Christian community, this means that the pastor shouldn't try to be in charge of every business, every school function, every political move. Instead, he should find leaders of hundreds already in his pews, that the men of God gifted to lead in economics, vocation, or civil life, and throw his weight behind them. So, and particularly with the normal-sized church that we have, there are a lot of different responsibilities that end up going to the pastor. And so as we grow, Lord willing, we're going to need to identify other leaders that can take some of those burdens off of, just the pastoral role. One thing that also the story teaches is about the limitations of the creature. So the Jethro principle is actually an exercise in humility. It forces a leader to admit that he is not God and therefore not omnipresent and omnicompetent. If a leader insists on interacting with everyone in an identical way, he is essentially acting as if he has no limitations. True biblical leadership recognizes the larger an organization becomes, the more it must rely on specialized role and a radical concentration of competence. So in the context today, Jethro principle means we must constantly be looking for the next generations of 10s and 50s. It actually might be a good idea for us to institute maybe some sort of a leadership guild to train men to be good churchmen and deacons, giving them small areas of responsibilities like managing a weekly media or a specific ministry to see if they can create order out of chaos, or even better, order out of just little order. So normally, throughout the lessons that we've had, I've tried to tie this into Alfred's situation. And while we can see the principle applied it in how he established those burghs around Wessex and made the foundations for English common law, I actually want to give a historical lesson a few centuries in the future to talk about another great Christian leader, Prince Henry the Navigator. Has anybody heard of Prince Henry the Navigator before? One person in this room should have, because we've covered that in our Challenge 4 class at Classical Conversations. We read a book called The Discoverers, and during the Age of Exploration, they talk about Prince Henry the Navigator, but that was several months ago, so I'm not surprised. It's okay. You didn't notice that, but that's okay. All right. So let's talk about who Prince Henry the Navigator was. So in the early 15th century, Portugal was a small, relatively insignificant country on the outer edge of Europe. To their east, the great powers of Europe like France dominated the landscape, and to the south and the east, the Muslim Empire held a stranglehold on the most lucrative trade routes to the Orient. Before Prince Henry's time, the general cultural mood in Europe was one of deep pessimism. Many believed the world was coming to an end soon and that there was little left to discover or accomplish. Prince Henry, however, was propelled by a tremendous amount of ambition and a sense of desperation to find a new way forward for his people. He realized that rather than trying to defeat the Muslim Empire through traditional military might alone, he could actually innovate by bypassing them entirely to shut down their economic engine. Prince Henry is a prime example of a leader with nerve, the willingness to embrace bold risks and to set out into the unknown. At that time, there was no satellite images or even accurate maps of the African coast. To sail south was to venture into no place where no one had gone before. It took immense imagination and audacity to send men out in wooden boats powered only with wind and oars, knowing that many would never return. In fact, it was common for half of the ships in these expeditions to be lost to storms, shipworms, or hostile populations. Despite these dangers, Henry had the clarity of vision to see the mission through, proving that men do not merely follow titles, but they follow courage. So Prince Henry was, some people said, a dealer in hope, and so we'll talk more about that a little bit. A term that was originally used for Napoleon, but it's also applicable here, I think. When his explorers reached the southern tip of Africa, a place so treacherous and full of doldrums that there was many went to die, he did not name it the Cape of Despair. Instead, does anybody know what the name of the Cape is?
Good Hope.
Good Hope, yes. This naming was an act of leadership designed to inspire his people and his sailors to look past the immediate hardship towards the eventual victory. By casting a positive, contagious vision of the future, he was able to break the imaginative gridlock of his entire civilization. Perhaps the most important lesson for us as a church that Prince Henry did not just go on a solo adventure, he built an institutional pipeline. He established a center in Lisbon that attracted the best cartographers, shipbuilders, and navigators of his day. Henry himself did not live to see the completion of the mission to reach the Orient. That would not happen until Vasco da Gama returned to Lisbon in 1499, more than 75 years after Henry began the project. However, because Henry built a pipeline and an apparatus for training future leaders, his vision endured across generations. He created a culture where innovation and bold risk-taking became the ways of his people. Prince Henry's nerve did more than just find a trade route. It sparked renewal of Western civilization. The spirit of adventure led to a monumental explosion in human innovation, art, commerce, and eventually the Protestant Reformation. In our own day, we often feel stuck by a bureaucracy of safety and stagnation. I feel that a lot. Prince Henry reminds us that a few brave men doing quality work can inspire an entire generation to start rebuilding. As we work to build our own Christian community, we should strive to be leaders like Henry, men and women who have the audacity to pursue greatness for the glory of God and the good of our grandchildren. So now that we've seen kind of leadership displayed by Prince Henry the Navigator, I want to talk about 10 principles of leadership with nerve. So kind of give credit where credit's due. The King's Hall did a podcast on this, and while these are not, I don't think, completely exhaustive, but I think there might be one or two that might stick out to you that you want to kind of chase down and think a little bit about, chew on. So principle number 1, recognizing ruling well as a divine gift. So biblical leadership begins with the understanding that the ability to rule or to lead is a specific spiritual gift mentioned in Romans 12, 6 through 8. It's not for everyone, and it cannot be manufactured by a mere academic degree of a microwavable training process. Leaders with nerve recognize that God has gifted them to bring order into chaos and set in order what remains in a disordered world. So that's the first one, recognizing ruling well is a divine gift. Second principle is to be self-differentiated. Self-differentiated. I'll get that out. A leader with nerve must be self-differentiating, meaning that they have total clarity about their own goals and principles. They possess edges. So when we think about edges, it's a sharp distinction edges is a sharp distinction of where they end and others begin. This allows them to remain grounded even when an institution is caught in an emotional storm. They hold their own convictions by principle rather than pragmatism, refusing to be moved by the latest trends or straw polls. So being differentiated is two different things, right? Having conviction, not moving with the winds. And the other part is making sure they know exactly where their edges are. And so not try to do more than what they're tasked to do. Number 3, be a dealer in hope. So we talked a little bit about how Prince Henry was like that as well. So inspired by bold explorers of history, leaders are essentially dealers in hope. In a culture where 84% of people have a negative outlook for the future, the leader with nerve puts forward a positive, contagious vision of Christ's victory. Like Prince Henry the Navigator, who looked at a place where people went and died and named it the Cape of Good Hope to inspire people towards the mission, right? So, I've talked about this before a couple different times, the we lose down here mentality. People don't seem to get encouraged by that, right? And myself included. And so it's actually one of the things that kind of drew me to the church here, specifically, Pastor Ed, and seeing him, before we came here, it was mostly through social media, but he had posts that he laid out a very positive vision about, Christ's victory, right? It's not like, I think some people have the view that things are going to get worse and worse and worse, and at the very last moment, God comes in and everything's, the eschaton is ushered in and everything's fine. I think what we see, though, that Christ gives examples about the kingdom of God being leaven, right? That leavens the loaf and things grow, or being a tree planted by the water and growing, right? And so I think that is a more accurate vision of what the kingdom of God is, and so we need leaders who recognize that and are able to communicate that effectively. All right, number 4, practice a stable presence, or what is called being a down transformer. So in highly charged or conflict-ridden situations, the leader must act as a down transformer. Instead of amping up the emotional current and passing it along, they step the voltage down to a manageable level. They are merchants of conflict, willing to start the right fights for the sake of a long-term peace, rather than papering over issues with false sense of niceness. So this is actually something that is taught with law enforcement, right? So law enforcement officers is charged in, the term that they use is de-escalation. So a lot of times when conflict happens, there can be a lot of emotions involved. And so a good leader will make sure that those emotions are recognized, but they're not going to add fuel to the fire. They're going to be a down transformer, kind of de-escalate the situation so cooler heads can prevail and the conflict can be resolved, as peacefully as possible. But also recognizes that conflict in some situations is inevitable, and they don't also shy away from conflict. So willing to embrace conflict, but also not willing to kind of amp things up unnecessarily. Sometimes it's necessary, but a lot of times it's not. Okay, number 5, they prioritize the tribe. So leadership is not a solo endeavor. A leader with nerve understands that only gods and heroes can be brave in isolation. True courage is found in the ranks with one's brothers. To build our community effectively, we need a brotherhood, a hierarchy, accountability, and the camaraderie of a tribe fighting for the same people in the same place. So this, what we're trying to build here is definitely not a solo sport, it is a team sport. And so good leaders going to make sure that they prioritize that. Number 6, moving from I to we. And so we'll talk a little bit more about the different kind of tribes that is in a book later. We'll talk a little about that in the next section called Tribal Leadership. But the idea is that we're moving from a mindset of I'm great, which is described as tribe 3, to tribe 4, which is we are great and we're doing great things. I might have said that phrase a couple of times before, and I'll go into more detail about it in just a bit. But this creates a cohesive living organism where the strength of the pack is the wolf and the strength of the wolf is the pack. The unity is often achieved through the tuning fork mechanism of public communication, where a shared vision is cast and reinforced. So this is for a certain leader is going to be gifted in making sure that there's a consistent communication, a consistent message, a consistent vision, and it is a we vision, not an I vision, right? Not I'm great, it's we're great, right? Number 7, focusing on leading your leaders. So as our community grows, good leaders are going to recognize their creaturely limitations and that they cannot interact with thousands of people in the same way they do with 10. Again, following the Jeff principle from Exodus 18, leaders with nerve will focus on finding, training, and impacting the chieftains or sub-leaders who can then care for the rest of the flock. And we kind of see that a little bit in our church as well. It's not, when it comes to caring for our folks, we have deacons. And each deacon has their own list of families that they're responsible for. And, we make sure that everybody's divided up as equally as possible with some forethought as to proximity and all those different other factors. And we do that, I think, pretty well here. And so as we grow, we're going to have to also think of other ways where we can make sure we're caring for everybody. Okay, point 8 is mastering the 20-mile march. Has everybody heard the 20-mile march before? Heard that term before? Okay, so this actually comes from a story of a couple groups that were going to make an expedition to I think it was the South Pole, or North Pole, one of the two. Anyway, the idea was that the way to get there was treacherous. And so there was one group that decided to say that no matter what was going to happen, every day we're going to go 20 miles to get there. And then there was another group that said, basically, when the weather's good, we're going to go as hard as we can, and when the weather's bad, we're just going to stay in our tents, until the weather improves or whatever. And so the group that did that, who tried to strike while the iron was hot and tried to do as much as they could when the conditions were right, they did not make it. It did not go well for them. But the team that consistently did the 20-mile march every day, no matter the weather, if the weather was really good and they could have done 100 miles that day, they still only did 20 miles. They ended up actually making the expedition all the way down. So in a similar way, we need to be consistently doing good things and not necessarily overextending ourselves, or when it gets hard, we don't shy away from still doing the things that we're going to be doing. There's a great book that Doug Wilson wrote called Plotactivity that is around it, and plotting is the idea, is that kind of doing the same thing over and over again consistently ends up building great things over time. And so that's kind of the idea, is that a good leader is going to recognize that, hey, we're going to keep doing good things regularly, and over time we'll see the results, as opposed to trying to look at conditions and kind of make judgments there. Okay, principle number 9, cultivate a sense of playfulness. Might be kind of surprised about that particular one. So leaders with nerve do not take themselves too seriously. They manage high stress of leadership by cultivating a sense of joy, mirth, and playfulness within their teams. They avoid the Puritan stereotype of being perpetually dour, and instead ensure that their culture is marked by laughter and friendship, which keeps them from dying under the weight of the task. And so I think that is actually, I think, a good opportunity for us, is to cultivate that sense of playfulness. And because that's the idea, is that like God has given us all of these things, these tasks before us, right? And sometimes those tasks seem really big and really kind of foreboding and just huge. And the idea is that God also promises that He's going to give us what we need in order to do the things that he has set out for us. And so, having that sense of joy, playfulness is a thing that actually attracts people, right? You want to be part of something fun, and it's not like, it's one of those things that God has given us to enjoy. And so we need to lean into that playfulness, and again, it's not always like doom and gloom. It shouldn't be that way. Okay, number 10. Building a pipeline for the future. So finally, leadership with nerve is multi-generational. Just as Prince Henry built a pipeline in Lisbon that trained navigators long after he was gone, we also must build institutional apparatuses that look like maybe leadership guilds and identify and enable the next generation of our leaders. Leaders must catch men in their early 20s, give them a space to cook in the church's culture for years, ensuring that the ways of community endure for 12 generations and beyond. So in sum, leading with nerve means being willing to be hated, rejected, reviled for a time in order to do what is best for people of God. It is the refusal to be a beautiful loser and commitment to choosing to win somewhere for the glory of Christ. How are we doing on time? Okay, we're doing good. All right, so talked a lot about leadership. The next thing I kind of want to cover with our remaining time is around team dynamics and functional tribes. So the book Tribal Leadership by Dave Logan, John King, and Haley Fisher Wright also had a foreword with Phil Jackson. Does anybody know who Phil Jackson is?
Basketball.
Right, yeah, exactly. NBA famous coach back in the day. He was completely ubiquitous in the 90s. Like if you grew up in the 90s, even though me, who's not, big into sports ball, I knew who Phil Jackson was. I knew who the Chicago Bulls were. I mean, just, it was something that was a cultural phenomenon. It was ubiquitous. And so anyway, what was so, compelling about the story there is that he was able to take a superstar like Michael Jordan and put him together with the right team in order for the Bulls to be extremely successful. And so, names like Scottie Pippen and Dennis Rodman, those they were good players, but even someone like me knew who they were because of that particular team dynamic and him doing the putting the right people in the right spot on the bus, to use another metaphor, in order to really drive success. So anyway. The book Tribal Leadership outlined 5 stages of tribal culture in organizations, and so this is definitely more of a leadership book that you probably would read in the business world, but I do think that there's some good applications here as well for church leadership as well. So the stages represent progressively more effective levels of group dynamics based on the dominant mindset, language, and behaviors within the tribe. So they define tribe as a natural group of 20 to 150 people. So that kind of actually does match our church here for the time being. Each stage builds on the previous one with the goal of advancing tribes to higher levels for better performance and collaboration. So here's a breakdown of the 5 stages. So stage 1 is life sucks. So this is the lowest stage, characterized by despairing hostility and alienation. People feel it is inherently unfair and hostile, leading to a survival at all costs mentality. Behaviors often include criminal or destructive actions with language reflecting a belief that the world is against them. This stage is rare in professional settings. They say it's about 2% of organizations have this stage 1 tribe, but it's seen mostly in environments like gangs and prisons, so gang mentality kind of. Stage 2 is my life sucks. So here, individuals feel victimized, but see the negativity as personal rather than universal. There's apathy, minimal effort, lack of initiative or passion, and passive-aggressive behavior. People do just enough to get by, often complaining about their circumstances without taking action. This stage represents about 25% of the workplace tribes and common in bureaucratic or disengaged cultures. And I think this is kind of where a lot of folks are at, particularly in the world, particularly in the business world. And I have to guard, particularly me, speaking personally, I have to guard myself against this particular because I feel like this a lot, particularly just kind of the way things are organized in business right now. HR departments are really, they suck the life out of you. And anyway, it's easy to feel like a victim. And so what we want to do is to recognize those difficulties, but at the same time, have those people that feel that way reject that victim mentality, because ultimately what ends up happening is they have that victim mentality and they want to spread that negativity elsewhere. And so again, it's important for us to acknowledge the difficulties, but also reject that victim mentality. All right, stage 3 says, I'm great, parentheses, and you're not. So focus shifts from a personal achievement and ego. Individuals are energetic and committed, but self-centered, hoarding information, forming didactic or two-person relationships, and competing to appear smarter or better than others. Language is I-focused, with complaints about lack of time, support, or competent colleagues. Winning is individual, not team-based. This is the most common stage, comprising about 49% of organizations, often seen among knowledge workers like doctors and lawyers. And so, and I also say that you kind of can see that now with modern sports is like that as well, with the free agency model. A lot of superstars, but not a lot of well-known teams, because it's more about what's in it for me. I can't depend on other people, therefore I'm going to make myself great. Stage 4 is the we're great. And so the tribe emphasized shared values and collective success over individual wins. Relationships are built on common purpose. Information flows freely, and languages uses we instead of I or you. Conflicts are resolved by third parties. Fear and stress decreases, and teams form ad hoc partnerships for tasks. Strategy implementation feels effortless, and there's more fun and aliveness. About 22% of tribes reach this level, leading to high performing cultures. And so that's kind of the direction we want to go. And then they also have a stage 5, which is even better. They say life is great. That's the stage 5. So the high stage marked by innocent wonderment and focus on global impact rather than competition. Tribes pursue history-making innovations with language reflecting boundless and potential, limited only by imagination and commitment. There's almost no fear, stress, or workplace politics. Values are resident and inclusive beyond the tribe. This rare stage, less than 2% of tribes, produces groundbreaking results, and it's seen exceptional organizations like IDEO or parts of Zappos. So those are kind of the 5 stages that they're talking about. So again, you're kind of looking in general, it goes from I to we, and then also then finally to we are great and doing great things. The other thing to think about, particularly when it comes to tribes, is to think about how their members of each tribe naturally interact and bond. And this is particularly relevant when we talk about sex piety, which we'll go in a little bit more detail in a future week. But it is important for us to realize this. So there are 3 basically categories of tribes. The first one is male-only tribes, female-only tribes, and then mixed groups. And so just kind of be aware of some of how those group dynamics work. So when it comes to male tribes, when it's all exclusively men, things are typically side by side. Men were designed to to fellowship primarily around shared activities rather than just talking about feelings. These tribes are built side by side through activities like shooting, training exercises, work, or even golf. These spaces are essential because men often don't fully become formed until they are forged together with other men. So the female-only tribes are more, instead of being side by side, in contrast, it's more face-to-face. Women tend to bond face-to-face, priority direct conversation, people and feelings over things and ideas. These groups are often a glue of the community, but operate under different social norms than male groups, such as an aversion to overt hierarchy. And so, again, it's not like these are one's good and one's not good. This is just how naturally things tend to happen when you have those male-only or female-only spaces. Those dynamics are at play. And then the thing to know is that with mixed groups, when tribes mix, the groups tend to inevitably adopt the female norms, such as an orientation towards niceness and emotional reasoning rather than direct speech and jousting over ideas. Again, not necessarily good or bad, it's just kind of how the way things are. And so we need to recognize those group dynamics when we're interacting with different groups. So just to take a look at a couple just historical tribes real quick as we wind down. Just know that you see this throughout the Bible. So you have Gideon's 300, just a group of men doing, taking back Israel from enemies, things like that. So you got Alfred's loyal elderman. Again, he did not act alone. He had a small band of his most loyal followers who were knit together in love and shared sacrifice. David's mighty men is a good example as well. It wasn't just King David, saving Israel. It was King David and his mighty men. We see that along in Samuel. So that's that. So that's kind of how looking about team dynamics, work leadership. Again, I think everybody here has some level of leadership, whether it's head of a household or managing a household or being participants in the household. We all have something for us to lead well, and so take what God has given you and try to think about some of those principles, maybe incorporating them. And then also, when it comes to group dynamics, have some self-awareness about what group you're in and how you can participate or lead well if you're put in charge of those things. Any questions or thoughts?
Yeah. You mentioned in the 5 personality where you get better at 5.
Right.
You mentioned the word history. And I think today we don't really recognize it. You can't have a future unless you know your history. And so today in America, and in the church even, the reason we study the Old Testament is because it shows us the future,
Yes.
Christ. And so it seems to me really important to understand that great leaders know history, because therefore, knowing history, they know the future. And today in colleges and many places, history is 5 minutes ago on YouTube or whatever. It's really important for the church to know its history, so it does have a future. And sometimes we don't talk about that.
Yeah, that's a great point, Dennis. And I would just say that as an extension of that, knowing history well, I think, is a way for us to also keep the 5th commandment, right? Honor your father and mother. That knowing history well helps us to do that, right? And so I think that's a very important point. It's very good. Any other thoughts? Okay, great. Well, let's close on a word of prayer. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for who you are and the amazing things that you have done for your people. And we want to recognize that and be blessed by that. As we moved into a time of corporate worship, I pray that you would prepare our hearts to do that and do that well and to answer the call there. It's in Christ's name, amen.